So we're up to chapter 14, Ayin Beis, volume 1. We're in Mimer 3, yes. The third discourse, which is the fourth discourse, the fourth discourse. And just for the record, each Mimer, the Friedrich Rebbe actually wrote a short one-line summary of the Mimer. The Friedrich Rebbe. Not the Kitzur, not the short, not the summaries. In the Mafteach, in the index in the beginning, Friedrich Rebbe wrote. So he writes on this discourse that we're learning a pshitas arose that Atzilus ain't pshitas arose the Ein Sof. That let's say the formlessness, the seamlessness, the formlessness, the shapelessness of the energies of Atzilus are not like the formlessness of the energies of Ein Sof. So though it's not the only theme, but he writes essentially the central theme at the beginning of the discourse, each discourse. Just good to see, sometimes it helps ground the subject matter. So that's exactly where we're at. We're speaking about, remember, we're speaking about the interface of Atzilus, where it has two sides to it. There's arose and kelim. From the perspective of the containers, they're distant. They sense the distance from Ein Sof, from transcendence. Because the way they were created is through concealment. Their focus is on their identity and their personality, not on their connection to their source. Remember, we're talking everything is in Atzilus, and even the containers are divine. But their personality is the focus is on chesed, on gvura, on what their function is. Eir, on the other hand, is so-called the agent of the divine. Eir is davuk to the moyer, which means it's connected to its source. It always senses that its role is to bring godliness into the picture. So the kelim are here to introduce so-called the godly attribute of chesed, love. And er is to remind us that that's coming from a place that's beyond chesed. So that would be the er. So therefore er is more of a gilui helam. It's revealing what is concealed, meaning it's not a new innovation, as opposed to the kelim, which is something anew. It's a new entity, because godliness on its own is not defined not by chesed, not by gvura. So er reminds us of transcendence, that it's not defined by this or by that, and container focuses on the divine attribute. Now, since God wanted a world of structure, so the kelim are necessary, because kelim are what define the structure. But the air is what keeps it, let's call it, is the market correction, so to speak. It's what keeps it honest. That you always remember the structure is not airtight, and godliness is not defined by the structure. So the kelim create the structure, and the air introduces the transcendence, reminding us that there's something beyond. And that's why air, the language of Ayin Beis here, air is gilui helam, means it's not created through distance, and the kelim are yesh ma'ayin. But then, in this discourse, in this fourth mimer, he began, but then we see that on the other hand, er also has an element of chachma ma'ayin tematzu. Even chachma, which includes the energy of chachma, the er of chachma is also ma'ayin. So how do you reconcile that with the fact that it's saying that the containers are ayin, whereas the energy is the davuk is connected to the kav is connected to the energy before the tzimtzum. So the chapter 12, and then elaborating more in 13, now we're up to 14. The answer is that also, basically, as the Friedrich Rebbe puts it in the summary, that at the end of the day, even the energies of Atzilus are not complete pshitus. They're not complete formlessness. So there's transcendence that's relative. So if you talk about the early for the tzimtzum, there you're talking about complete formlessness. But the air of Atzilus has in it 10 spheres: Chesed, Gvura, Chochmah, Bina, etc. He proves it from Atik and from Akudim, where in Atik there are no containers. Akudim there's one container, and yet they both identified by 10 spheres.
All after the tzimtzum.
Yeah, of course, after the tzimtzum. And so Esses spheres Bli Ma, So on one hand, the spheres, even the energy, is blima, doesn't have substance or form, but it's still esospheres. So he's introducing now the concept, of course, in the interface itself, that even though the energy compared to the containers is formless, but compared to higher levels, it has some element of form. And this is what he discussed with the faculties, if you recall, in the earlier chapters, that even though the soul itself, the human soul, it has in it the possibility to manifest in all faculties. The fact is, when the soul enters the body, you don't just have life, you also can see, you can hear, you can smell, taste, touch. All the other faculties are functioning. So clearly, it's coming from the same soul. So the soul, which is an indivisible and formless energy, because the soul is not made up of parts. The soul is an energy that gives life. So let's say when we're asleep, the soul then is functioning. The soul is functioning at a lower level, like a low burn, but it's there. The faculties are not functioning to their fullest. Yeah, I'm not talking about the heart or the mind.
Power save
mode. Conscious, right? Or God forbid, in a serious coma, where a person could be like a vegetable, God forbid. The soul keeps the person alive, but the faculties. So clearly the soul has two functions. It's giving life, which is equal from head to toe, but it's also what he calls pnimi. That the energy of the soul has a way of manifesting through a diminished state, has a way of manifesting in the containers. And he made a whole case, which I won't repeat now, but the same idea in the mocha. That it's not the pshat, it's not the meaning that the soul is like formless energy, and it just happens to, part of it goes into the eyes, part into the nose, part into the ears. No, the way the energy that goes into the eye is different. The energy, not just so it's not like what he said, for example, it's not like water in colored glasses. Water in colored glasses just assume the color to the eye of the beholder. The water doesn't change at all. You may not see it because you're seeing through the glass, so you see through the lens, it's blue, green. But if you pour out the water, you see the water was not affected in any way. So he says, no, that the neshama has two keiches, just like eres makifim, eres pnimim. Makif of the soul, which is going to discuss later, is the rotzen, the keser, is all-encompassing. So yes, does not have a place where your desire rests. There's no place in the human body where desire is everywhere. Or nowhere, you can say. It's in the soul, and whatever you desire. If I want to desire to move my foot, or desire to think, basically desire just really goes according to whatever, the focus on the desire, the soul's desire, not on the container. But when you're talking about the power to see, there, the container is fitting and tailored to the energy, and the energy is tailored to the eye, to the container. So the question, of course, the hard question is, how does it get from a formless soul into some form?
The container itself draws that energy.
Yeah, for sure. But he makes the case that the energy itself has to be conducive to it. In other words, the eye cannot draw the energy of sound, of hearing. So how that works, obviously, we need to abstract a bit. But clearly, something causes the soul through some form of diminishing, something that has built into it to tell it that it should fit into those containers properly, and not like, as I said, not like the water in the colored glasses. So what is it in the nimshal? In the nimshal, the same thing, that the arose of Atzilus, though they are fundamentally still energy, and they're connected to the source, and they are drawn to the source, and they're transcendent. Bottom line is they're still air. They are drawing upward. They're reaching upward. They're not going down, but they have in them, whether it's a message that God embedded in them, or because of the kavanah, whatever the reason is, which is not discussed here, they have within them spheres. They have in them esospheres. There's eir chesed, not just klei chesed. Now, eir chesed compared to klei chesed, obviously, is one is form, and one is identity, and one is formless. You could say like this. Just to give a little taste of how to explain it, you could say that the eir chesed senses that it has to express love, but it focuses on God wanting to express love. It's like when we sometimes say in mitzvahs, there's the kavanah klolos of the mitzvah, and there's the kavanah pratis. Say asher kedushanim tzvanu. We say in all mitzvahs that you sanctified us and commanded us. Doesn't say what. Tzivanu what? Lahadlik ner Shabbos. Tzivanu k'yah shefer. So you have two parts in it. One is, I'm fulfilling your will. Now you happen to want me to blow shofar, or eat matzah, or do another mitzvah, tal minim. So, but that's not pshat that that it's like water in the glasses. Both are happening. There's an equalizer here that says it's God's will. In other words, you're blowing shofar not just because you're in the mood of it, or because it's cultural. It's because Hashem wants you to do that. So you're sensing this is what Hashem wants, and even if you want me to go chop wood, as the Alter Rebbe says, I would do that. So it's complete dedication to the Baal HaRatzon, to what and then there's an element, he wants me also to focus on the Kavanah Pratis. He doesn't just want me to focus whatever he wants, even if I go, now I'm not chopping wood. The same one who said I should do it, no matter, and I do it unconditionally, like Nasa, also wants Nishma. He also wants me now to think about the Shofar, and what's the Kavanah of a Shofar is different than the Kavanah of a Lulav and Esrog, different than a Matzah, a Shofar, Min HaMetzah, whatever the Kavanah is. He wants me to bring the pshittus, so to speak, the formlessness of just doing his will into existence. That this and this activity that I'm doing, that I'm eating right now, I'm not sleeping, I'm not doing business. In my food, he wants to permeate that ratzon. So you have right there the interface. How do you bring a God that is beyond any structure into a structure? The answer is in a logical way, because God created an interface. Atzilus. He says, I'm giving you both. Kelim represent the structure. The shofar, the food, whatever it may be. The air, never forget that the air is radiating, and the air is reminding you it's love you're doing now, chesed or gvura, but it's air of elikus. So the keli focuses on the structure. If you didn't have the container, it would be lacking the structure of what we need, is a real defined structure. If you only had the keli, you could get stuck in the structure and lose sight of the source to some extent. So the perfect balance, and we learn this a lot later, of course, with Toyu and Tikkun, perfect balance is where they both respect and understand each other. Now, in truth, the example I gave is not really a good example. It's not accurate. It's only good for explain it a bit. Because in truth, the Ratzon is really makif. That's really the keser within the mitzvah. I just explained, relatively speaking, Eir, so to speak, so Eir has chesed in it. I'm thinking of a human example. A human example would be, you love someone, you love your spouse, you love your children. And we know love is not just in the heart, you want to do something for them. So you express your love in a certain way. You buy them a present or some other tangible expression. So there's a container of the love and there's the energy of the love. You can give someone a gift and give it to them almost like in a way, in a cold way, and they don't feel even that you're there. You just gave it to them and you run off. So that's like, you did a nice container of love, it's tangible, but you don't feel the spirit of it. It's like giving tzedakah without a smile, without the kavanah. And then you could also give a smile and not give them anything. Men need to be reminded of this more than women, I guess. But my point I'm trying to say is that you really need to have, almost like kavanah and kavanah mitzvah and my mitzvah, the same thing is, you could see that even the kavanah, for example, when you give the smile or you give the spirit, the person feels the love. So that it's eira chesed now. It's not eira gvura. But it's not as tangible as the container of it. I'm just trying to give an example where the air still retains its property of being air, transcendent, but it's defined by some structure. That's really what he's addressing in this mimer. He's trying to go to that place where air, that in between place where air itself is more pshittus compared to the containers, but it's not real complete pshittus. So you have an interface that's working. If air was before the tzimtzum, it wouldn't be contained by the containers, and it would. So air has some seer here, and he explained it in chapter 12. He explained at length, logically as well, that since it goes into the container, you have to say it has, because nothing infinite can go into finite. So the mere fact that these two meet, and he discussed at length the difference between the pshittas before the tzimtzum and after the tzimtzum. I won't go there. I already did that. In chapter 13, he said, Levat kol hanal, he brings another demonstration or proof of this, that the air is pshittas, but not complete pshittas. They're formless, and the proof is with achlifa d'chtaya, the role reversal. where you have Eir HaChesed b'Kli HaGvura and Eir HaGvura b'Kli HaChesed. And the classic example of Shammai and Hillel, where generally speaking, they hear the same idea from a teacher, meaning Shmaya v'Avtalya. One takes out of it Chesed, lenience, Matir, and this one is Aser, is stringent. What we know from this? We know from this that an idea can be formless, and then, but it still has some element of form because the proof is it goes into each one of them in a different way. So two things are happening here at once. They both, remember, they're tracing their conclusion from their teacher. It's not their own. But Shammai has containers, his klei hasoga, his containers, his personality, like you say, his intellectual personality is gvuradik. That's how he thinks. He thinks in terms much more measured, more strict, disciplined, like with a potential convert. You can't teach the entire Torah standing on one foot. In general, looking more, like it says, Shammai Meloshin, what's the Lashon? It says,
Hardline, more hardline. More hardline.
But the word Shammai itself is Meloshin Chassidus brings, Hillel be Hillel Neder, is light.
Shammai is
Meloshin measure,
evaluation.
Evaluation, but there's a word. Not,
Shmuel, I think.
Okay. And Hillel's intellectual person, huh?
The appraisers today in Israel is called Shammai.
Right.
Sure.
And Hillel's intellectual personality, meaning his containers, are chesedic. Chesed. So therefore, they're hearing an idea. The idea is Remember, the idea is energy. The idea is flowing out of a teacher, and this one is taking it this way, this one's taking this. And so he's making the case here this. You could argue, you know what? The energy of Shmaya v'Avtalya is like the water, and the containers and personalities of Shammai and Hillel are like colored glasses. Meaning, Shammai v'Avtalya is completely pshittus. She says, no, it's not that way. It's not that way. Because the svara actually is chesed or gvura. This is what they hear. Not just they heard an amorphous idea, but in the original source, it's also that way. Except there, it's in a state of, it's not yet defined.
What was the proof of that?
The proof is because of the chlifa d'chtaya. The proof is because when they go back a second time to the teacher, and they hear it again coming from the source, if they listen again, like a good, intelligent person who's objective, they can suddenly hear the other conclusion. That means that there's something in the air. Because if the air was always that way, it's only the container is always blue. It's always going to be blue. How can a blue container go back and hear a blue energy? It won't. The energy doesn't have a color. But because the energy does have some type of shape and form, that's why they can hear it differently, and that's why he says that at times, intersection, that sometimes Beis Shammai are lenient, and Beis Hillel are stringent.
So the or has both middles.
Yes, but
It's
it's in a relatively formless state, not defined yet. It's an example of that in-between place where there. Basically, it means like this: a svara, an idea, energy in general, concept, even one that can come to different conclusions, because of its pshittus, because its nature is somewhat transcendent and not tangible, it is able to be interpreted in different ways, even opposite ways, because it contains the possibility of both those ways. So it's the container that creates the tangible difference, like halacha. So both, on a certain level, are true. In the world of Chesed, Hillel is correct. The world of Shammai, but we live in the world where you can't do both. So there's halacha vayim, halacha kameshe. Halacha is like the container determining whether it's al pi reiv or al pi the psak of Hillel, whatever it is, that this is the way we're going to do it. But that doesn't mean there's no validity to the other concept, because we're talking again within the context of Torah parameters.
But there is validity because the air has that also.
Right.
If it would only be the container, there would be no validity.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Okay, the validity in Kim Chayim has to be.
Also, he brings the proof that it's not like the water in the containers, colored glasses, because Because it says, in other words, yes, it's the container that's doing something here, but it's mechayev only chesed, not gvura. Because if it was like water in a colored glass, you could hypothetically say that this water could be gvura, but it's never. It's always mechayev chesed when it's there. And when it goes back to the source, that's when it can take on a different shape.
So the container has something to do with it.
Yeah, it definitely, look, it always needs explanation. It's a dance here. What is doing what? I mean, maybe another example you can use is like sometimes in therapy, there's behavioral therapy, and there's we'll call it therapeutical therapy. The psychoanalytic therapy. One focuses on behavior change, almost like shinui habits. You learn to say thank you to somebody. Bring flowers home. Routines, and do them enough times until they become tevasheni, and that itself will elicit. Like the classic story where the guy wanted to divorce his wife, so the Rav said, treat her one final time, treat her like a queen, and then they did, and that caused him to not want to leave her again, because he behaved that way. So it's like sometimes they say sometimes in fundraising they say the mistake that many people think is they think people's heart investment follows their heart. It's not true. Their heart follows their investment. Get them to give a little, and then their heart will want to invest it to give more. So in other words, my point is sometimes the kelim bring the arose. Sometimes behavior brings the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
That's why sometimes we do things, it says do it anyway, like because you do it, that'll bring, obviously doing it alone is mitzvah sanoshim alamada, mechanical. Sometimes the energy brings the container. Sometimes when you think about it and you focus on it, it can awaken the feeling. So there's no real rule in this case. It just means that they both go both directions. Here, the beauty is like this. I always found that people, like, Atzilus is the concept that you find like this. Someone who's a brilliant mind, that really understands things well, one of the biggest signs of brilliance is that he has no problem thinking completely opposite of his own conclusion. Because brilliance is not about ego, it's not about pride, it's about truth. So let's say a person has worked hard on an idea, and then you come and you hear it, and you say, you know what? I'm going to play devil's advocate. I think exact opposite. An intelligent person is going to listen. Now, if he's really intelligent, he may have already considered that. But let's say he didn't consider. It doesn't matter whether he did or didn't. But he's able to consider something opposite of his own thinking. Why? Because seichel by nature is not trapped in the conclusion. Right? It's poshet. That's really what it is. So I'm saying I wouldn't. In a way, but not necessarily. What I mean to say is, because if you're the seichel itself, he goes back and hears it again and says, you know what? Maybe you could interpret it that way. And then you have two opposite interpretations. And how do you go from here? So there, of course, you need even more seichel to dig deeper and see which is seemingly leaning more correct or getting another opinion. But my point that I'm trying to say is, which is maybe relevant to the whole Ayin Beis, because remember later in Ayin Beis, the interface becomes chachma sti'maah. Because wisdom is a place where ayin meets yesh. In bina it doesn't, because in bina I'm understanding. It's me and me understanding. The details and my understanding dominate. In midas for sure, it's all about me. It's my feelings about it. Subjectivity. Chochma is like he says in Tanya, in Perek Lamed Hey, in the Haggadah there, he says that Chochma koyach is margish feels hu levade ve'ein zulaseh. The sense of wonder that we have when something falls into our head is a sense of something beyond me. So it's humbling. Seichel be'etzem, if it's not affected by midas, is a humbling experience. Because it's like recognizing a truth that's beyond you. So that means I didn't understand it the day before. Today I'm beginning to get it. So it's like when something falls in the head, it's like, where did that come from? So that and that moment is a divine moment. It's like something came from a higher place in time. This will be a critical interface. But I'm just thinking that this also can apply to the whole thing he's saying. That's why seichel, like the seichel of Shammai Hill, is by fundamentally, it's not a tangible thing. a physical thing is. I give you $1, either I give it to you or I don't give it to you. You can't say it's yours and not yours at the same time. In Seichel, you could say it's mine and not mine at the same time. It's mine because I'm beginning to comprehend it, but it's not mine because I know it's coming from another place, and if I go back to the source, I may come back with another conclusion. So it has that so-called elusive element to it that allows you not to be completely controlled by the yesh. I think that's I think that's I think a very, in my opinion, a good way to explain how. So it's arose, pshutim, but it's in the container. Now, when you talk about being in awe completely, walking into experience where you have experienced kesed, as he's going to say, arose higher than Atzilus, there is going to be complete bittul. You're not there. Your containers will not have any. Will be completely lost, suspended. So this is chapter 13. No, chapter 14 now. Bottom of 22, page 22. The Yuvan Zelamaila, and we'll understand this above, this discussion of exchange. Of this thing, what he said, like that it's air, it's pashut, but nevertheless, it has some shape and form. But even when it has some form, it still remains formless, and that's why it can exchange roles. I think it's the more I think about it, that bittul that Seichel has, you can come to a very strong conclusion to something, and then go back and realize otherwise. Like in midas, that's not as easy to do. I mean, you have to break yourself.
That's not a bit like Dusha. I mean, even a scientist who's objective can come to that, right?
So the Alter Rebbe says, because Chochmah does have bittul, it's a certain element. I don't call kedusha, but it's a certain element of kedusha also. I mean, bittul, kedusha meaning holy, but it's bittul of a positive bittul. A scientist that has that capacity is doing something that is, it says, rising above anivav seid and the midas. Look, a scientist that forged data, or basically their midas are affecting their seichel.
Right.
It's like sheichid abrei nechacham, basically. So sheichid distorts, but a real chacham doesn't let the emotions or my conclusions define, like the whole thing. There's always the possibility of another perspective and so on. A good scientist that has that, I would say yes, it's a similar.
And that's divine. That's something divine, right? That he could devise above.
Yeah. And divine, yes, absolutely.
Because man is.
He says about the philosophers and by even non-Jews who were misguided and were real about his seichel. It speaks in that same level that they're able to come to a very ruchnistic place.
Because man was created in the image of God.
Yeah, for sure. The Yuvan Zelamaila, to understand this above, al derech Maimer Razal, shtei kachol machshav. So we'll understand this like the derech, the Maimer Razal says it, I think more than one place, but the famous place is shtei kachol machshav is when the angels came, Moshe came, but they started to do Malchus.
Yeah.
And Zu Teira v'Zu Schara, those 10 great martyrs were being massacred by the Roman Emperor
In a brutal way.
In a brutal way, right? Which we say Eila Eska in Yom Kippur. So it says Zu Teira, this is Teira, and this is reward. So it says Shteik. God says, be silent, kach ala machshav. That's what arose in machshava. My thought. And if you don't stop, it doesn't say that here, but I'll destroy turn over the whole world. From this state, be silent. This is what arose in my will, or this is what arose b'machshav, in the will. So it doesn't say machshav.
In my thought.
In my thought. No, sorry. My machshav, thought. It doesn't say machshav. Okay, yeah. L'chera mashma, apparently this implies, she'en lezeh tam klal. It has no reason at all. Someone says, be quiet, this is what my thought arose in my thought, and that's that. God forbid to say this. In truth, you cannot say that. Chalila. They say Chalila. Yeah, it's
the real word translation.
It's sacrilegious to say this.
Yeah.
It's sacrilegious to say this. Okay. Because you can't say by God, the derech akshus that's just being stubborn and obstinate, God forbid. Because that's what it appears. No reason. Like, that's what I want and that's it. Like a child that is just having a tantrum. El shezeh inyan tam hakomus shelamayla ma'aseichel v'achach. Rather, what's going on here, what this is a tam hakomus. Komus is concealed, covered up, locked. Maybe locked, right? Komus is locked. Yeah, probably. The reason that's locked, shelamayla ma'aseichel v'achach, that's higher than seichel and chachma. Meaning, than conscious seichel and chachma. Because saying tam hakomus, there is a seichel, there's a tam. But l'mayla higher than so-called logical intelligence and wisdom. And according to seichel, meaning our conscious, tangible, logical rules, it has no reason at all. To the extent, as those that ask the question, it has no room in seichel. There's no space in seichel. To the extent that they asked on this, when you see a person who's behaved properly and the highest standard, Torah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, all those 10 martyrs, each one in their own great, in their own saying, you see that they are being tortured and brutally killed in the worst possible way. Say, this is Torah, this is reward. It's completely not logical. Torah is God's Torah. You told us you will reward us. A person's behaving, if he was behaving inappropriately, you could say, I understand the logic, even though I may not like it, but I see tit for tat. Where's the midi connected midi here? Where's there's no, it's not commensurate. It's opposite of a human logic. So clearly, ein zeh tam klal in our seichel, and that's what the basis of the question is. Was tam hakomus higher than our seichel? So to say, so you have here, right here, this like paradox. You're saying it's not seichel, that's why they asked the question. And God is also not saying an answer. He's saying, "Stay, be quiet. This is what arose in my will, my desire." I keep saying my will. The truth is, machshava here is almost like will. It's not like sometimes machshava is a thought because he did it. But machshava is thought. Yeah. On the other hand, you're saying you can't say, like he says, that ein lo tam klal as of some type of stubbornness. You have to say there's a reason, but it's beyond our reason, basically. So what does that mean? How is it reason or not reason? I mean, in other words, right here you see an example of pshittus and not pshittus. What is going on here? This is the energy of the wisdom that's higher than the container of the wisdom. Like we spoke about Shmaya V'Avtaya. Before it came to the container, the idea can go many ways. Let's read it inside how he's going to explain it here. It's a pretty interesting parallel, strong parallel. Because you'd think, Lamaila, he would explain it more like, two people have two different opinions, Chesed and Gvura, and they receive from Chacham being in different ways. He's going a very strong example here that's like almost jolting in a very negative situation. But okay, that's the seichel. That's the air. The ima yeshe chachma v'tam. Even though the energy of chachma is also chachma v'tam, it's called chachma. Like we said, it's era chachma. It's not era bina. Not era ches. Makom makom v'gabe ha'chachma v'aseichel. Shuklei ha'chachma nida kilu rotzen b'li tam. Nevertheless, relative and compared to wisdom and intelligence, that's in the container of chachma, which has certain logical rules. That something that was done good should be rewarded, not punished. Neither it appears as if it's a will without rotzen, will without reason.
So for the container, the aid is like rotzen, because that's
rotzen b'li tam. Yeah. In other words, it has tam there. It's chachma, but compared to the container that has logical rules, this chachma I don't relate to. For me, it appears there's no. This is just a thing without a reason. It appears illogical. though there is a chachma to it. Well, let's continue. Let's see how far he goes with this. How much we have to explain. I hope we don't have to explain anything. Everything is clear. V'im kain hu mufshit. V'im kain hu mufshit meged klei chachma. So, im kain, from this we derive, if this is the case, that this era chachma is mufshit meged klei chachma. This energy of wisdom is removed from, is abstracted from, mufshit, above. Mufshit is when you undress something almost, like it's like removed from, it's freed, like unlayered from the container of chachma. Shu seichel, which is, again, I keep emphasizing logical seichel, meaning the logical rules that we go by. V'hainu, in the parentheses, yes, v'hainu gamma er ha-mislabish b'keli. So he's going now a step further. Remember, there was 3 steps. There was the seichel as it comes from Shmai Vavtayim. There's the seichel as Shammai hears it and Hill hears it. And there's the slapshus in their container, Chesed and Gvura. So it's really 3. I'll tell you why it's 3.
Wasn't Shmai Vavtayim is one, the transmission was the other one, and
And right, yeah. So generally, the seichel of Shmai Vavtayim is pashut. It has within Chesed and Gvura, but it's not yet visible. It's still formless. Shammai hears it. He hears it with his container, so it comes in. But even the seichel has the chesed before it enters its container.
And is the way it goes.
Yeah, and then it comes chesed in his container. But then he goes back to the teacher, and it's still the teacher, the same transmission. But now, because the transmission also has gvura in it, because chesed in it, so now even though his container would dictate gvura, it becomes chesed because the seichel allows for that shift. That's, I think, it's a 3-step process, really. So, in other words, you have Eir Hashaychus L'Kli, and then you have the Eir in the Kli. No, I should rephrase that. You have Eir, that's Keil Chesed and Gvura. You have Eir HaChesed, you have Eir HaGvura, and then you have Klei HaChesed and Klei HaGvura. That's how I would say it. So there's the Seichel Nishmai Vavtayim. If you spoke to them directly and you asked them which one is it, they would just repeat what they're saying, and they're saying it has both in it. If you ask, but there is a Eira Chesed there, and there's a Eira Gvura, and that's where, and then there's the Keli clay. Anyway, back to here. So he's saying like this: that where it is in the Eira itself, the Eira of Chochmah, it's above the container, but also above the energy that manifests in the container. Because the energy, once it manifests in the container, then it's like the container. To understand and comprehend what the container is capable of comprehending. So you have the air before it enters the container is mufshet, not just from the container and its form, but also from the energy that has now been fit into that form. Let's see where he goes with this. The importance of all these levels.
It's that cannot go into the keli. It's not before it enters the keli. The air is going to go into the keli, but
okay, it's also afterwards. Fine, etzem air mufshet. The etzem air is always mufshet. Yeah, right. Well, you know something? If that's the case, it may not be correct what we just said. Because the question is like this: once the air enters the container, is also the etzem air is also stuck there, so to speak. Not stuck.
Not according to this.
No. I would argue yes. I'll tell you why. Because if it's not, then why do they have to go back to their teacher? They just have to access the etzem air that's there anyway and just sing. Why not?
If they're containers, they can't access it.
Because if you remember, they said they have to leave when they go back to the teacher. It's like going. It's leaving the container, going back to the teacher. But if the etzem air is there, why do they have to go back to the teacher?
So it's not there. The etzem air is not in the keli. It can't go into the keli.
So it's not trapped in there. That's what I'm
The
saying.
etzem air is not trapped in the keli.
It's got to be there in 2 minutes.
What?
It's got to be there in 2 minutes.
No, the etzem air cannot be in the keli. That's what he's saying
It's got
here.
to be there in 2 minutes.
Etzem air mufshet mizeh from the keli. Hagam shu gam.
No. So you understand what I'm asking? Why do they have to go to the teacher? Let them just access the etzem air. They can only access the etzem air when they go to the teacher. Is that what you're saying? Maybe. Okay. I'm just pointing it out. I'm trying to say is, once you heard that, that's, maybe they can't access it until they go back to the teacher. That would be the reason. That would be the reason. Because once it's in the container, you already have your seichel now, kavura, chesed. You can't suddenly go back. You go back to the teacher reignites so-called energy, the abstract idea, which can then be manifested another way. Anyway, let's continue here. Bottom line he's saying here is that compared to logic within the container, this doesn't seem logical. This doesn't seem like it has a reason, though it does. So it's chachma, but the chachma is mufshet. It's separate from, it's above the container and also the energy as it's in the container. And this is al derech, compared to, similar to, the difference between the intelligence inside the mind compared to the intelligence inside the soul, hamaskelis, where intelligence comes from, the root of intelligence. The guf, before it manifests in the body. Shehu seichel lahasig muhusa ruchnis mamish.
He's going way deep.
Hold on. No, he's going into a new thing right now. Hold on. Okay, yeah. Okay, let's stop here a moment and let's brace.
Why does he have to go so deep? Say He could just say that's also.
You already have a question. I'm trying to understand first what he says. Maybe. Okay, you have to start like almost a new paragraph here. He's introducing a new concept here. What's the concept of this? This goes back to several chapters back. 10 o'clock, I can't do it. We spoke about this earlier when we spoke about the soul. I mentioned it also here before. The soul has the capacity of many faculties. Proof is, it doesn't just give life. Like for example, if our soul, for example, was put into a stone, the stone may come alive, but the stone wouldn't be able to see or hear. Besides the containers, it doesn't have such energy. Or let's put it this way, the containers are not there, so therefore the energy of the soul would not have where to go.
Even a behemoth.
Right. So bottom line is that the soul has, without getting into explanation, has energy, and it also has pnimi. With proper diminishing and tzimtzumim, we'll be able to manifest in the particular containers. Elsewhere in Ayin Beis, he speaks, for example, why you call this notion sagi nar. He's called a blind person, a person that has a lot of light. So usually it's like it's a euphemism, like saying, when it's also you say they have a lot of light. It's like saying an idiot has a lot of seichel. So he asked the question, how could you embarrass someone that you just say something like that? Just it's rubbing it in. What's it called? It's an expression.
Insulting.
Right. So the answer is true. It is. The reason that the blindness, in some cases at least, is because there aren't the translucent, opaque layers. So God forbid if you don't have the pupil and a few other things, the light shines through, you can't see. So it could be too much light. So you need the tzimtzumim that are necessary to get the energy into the container properly. The energy just flows. So the same is with seichel. The brain is clearly the container for the mind. Again, we don't understand, but that's how it is. This brain, this physical brain. If it was different, this brain, God forbid a stroke or something causes brain damage, the seichel disappears from that area. It's because seichel needs that container. And it cannot manifest in the nose. It will not really be replaced. There is in stroke victims is rechanneling of fashion, but it's all within the brain, right? So what's happening here? So there's seichel inside the container, but we also know there's seichel where it originates from. In other words, the soul has the power, nefesh hamaskelis. The soul has the power of passive seichel. Now, obviously, in the soul, you're not going to see seichel functioning. It's called unconscious type of seichel, but it's definitely there. So he's comparing these two things to that. The seichel in the moach is more like the tam that we relate to, conscious intelligence. The seichel in the nefesh is more like the tam chakamus. That's kedim islapshusa b'guf, before it manifests in the body. Shuhu seichel, and now he's explaining what kind of seichel is that. So okay, 1 second. Explain to me what does that seichel have that seichel in the mind does not have? She says, Shuhu seichel ahasim muhusa ruchnis mamash. This is an intelligence that understands muhusa ruchnis mamash. Seichel in the mind, we cannot, as we've learned in different places, understand the muhus of ruchnis. You know the mitzias of ruchnis. You can sense there's something out there. There's something spiritual. But really appreciating the muhus, what muhus mahu, what really is the essence of spirituality. Remember, I give the example with the apple. You saw how difficult it is. It's very hard for us to relate to. The example of the apple in your mind is a stickle example, but you can hardly call that muhus. Because we can relate, an apple we can touch. But apple in my mind, what is it? An image? Is the image real? Is it not real? What is spirituality? So I'm not saying we can't talk about it, and we also can experience it, but it's definitely not the muhus of ruchnis mamash. Yes, as mamash. Shezewin ha'asog el yena. This is already a higher comprehension. Like the comprehension of angels, shamasigi muhus ruchnis, that comprehend the muhus of ruchnis, not just the mitzias of it. They comprehend. They are spiritual entities, so they relate to spirituality. And the muhus ruchnis is the biyah. Okay, it's qualifying because malachim are usually in biyah. There are malachim and Atzilus, but that's usually the exception. So you're talking about the muhus of ruchnis in biyah. Now we already discussed that biyah ruchnis is also that's fine. There we go. I think I discussed this yesterday. Like a comprehension that's not in time and space. Talk about what existed, what was there before God created the world. Okay, there was no before. As soon as you say that, the mind has big problems. Because we think in terms of time and space, are natural. So, as it says elsewhere. And even more so, the comprehension, this is malachim, angels. And more so the comprehension of souls in Gan Eden and paradise in Gan Eden. Shemasigi Mahus Arugim, Gan Eden here, obviously we're not talking about the Gan Eden that was a physical one, but Adam Chava in the Garden of Eden. We're talking about the spiritual Garden of Eden where a soul resides after it passes and before it comes to this world. What do they have? Shemasigi Mahus Arugim. They comprehend and appreciate the essence of spirituality. That's what they do. When we say they learn Torah, they learn Torah. What are they learning? They're learning about a part of a chamer, a cow and a donkey, about theft, about litigation, about damages. They're learning the spirituality of it. Their limud is in everything, the spiritual of it. Because souls understand the muhus hadavar. Not here, but elsewhere it talks about neshamas understand even more than malachim. It's another discussion because that's why soul can come down here. It's greater. But another malachim is more gilui. Whatever. The bottom line is we're talking here a different level. This what
malachim only grass hand mahus haruchni, and over here the neshamas muhus hadavar.
Okay. Yeah. So the bottom line is what he's making a case here. He wants to show that there's seichel and there's no seichel at the same time. It's not our seichel in the keli, but it's a seichel on a different level that's hard for us to comprehend. So obviously God, when he says shtei kachol machshav, is even higher than that. So what we're seeing here is basically something that's higher than container. This is what the nefesh hamaskelis, as opposed to the seichel shebemayach that's inside the mind. Mashenken seichel shebemayach, here goes. This was the nefesh hamaskelis. This is how seichel works in the nefesh if you were able to access that. Mashenken, however, seichel shebemayach, one seichel enters the brain, the mind. It does not comprehend at all what is truly ruchnius. Only that it exists. What do we appreciate? Muhus is gashmi. Well, gashmi we have the muhus. Tangible, relate to. But the tangibility of the spiritual it does not is not equivalent, is not compared, can be compared to the tangibility of Gashmis. No, that's for sure. So if we see from this that the seichel shebemayach is not me'erech, it's not in the same league, it's not in the same proportion in a me'erech, it's not the same relation. It's not in relation to, not in the same category, not in the same context of the seichel and the neshama at all. The sham hasag hirag b'mus aruchni, because there in the neshama, in the soul, the source, it's the understanding, comprehension is in the mahus, the essence of the spiritual. And the seichel, the mind, is understood only the physical. We understand the mahus, the essence of physical. And the spiritual is only the awareness of that it exists, not its mahus, not what it is. That it is, but not what it is. And this distance between the intelligence in the mind compared to the intelligence in the soul is not comparable to, for example, emotions compared to seichel, emotions compared to intelligence. Even though emotions and seichel are also two different realities, two different personalities, two different entities. Nevertheless, they're commensurate to one another. They're proportionate to one another. The b'chinas, they're commensurate to each other in their mitzias. What does that mean? Meaning, I guess, in their relationship to Gashmis, maybe. And they're both spiritual entities.
Well, not tangible. You can't touch an intellect.
No, I understand, but basically, what he's saying. Okay, let's see the end of it. Bottom line, Midas and Seichel they're in the same. They're two different entities, but in the same department. They're in the same league.
Realm.
Avla Seichel shebenefesh hamaskel, but the Seichel and the nefesh hamaskel, so the source shemasig muhus haruchni that comprehends the essence of spiritual. It is literally like above Seichel compared to the relative to the conscious Seichel or revealed Seichel. So Midas and Chachma and Moichin, Moichin is more powerful than Midas and higher, but you can't say the Midas will say this is higher than my Seichel. I relate to it. There's some relationship. Here, it's actually compared to something that's higher than Seichel Mamsh. Yeah. And nevertheless, it's still Seichel. It's not Rotzen alone. It's not Rotzen Elyon. There is Seichel.
How do you define it?
And not only that, it's also a mocha, is the root, the source of conscious Seichel. It's unconscious Seichel and not conscious Seichel. I'll explain it. Let me read it and see everything he says. That way you can see what we need to explain. So there is introducing Chachma sti'maah, which is going to be a vital piece in the puzzle.
Even the
Yeah, the same thing is coming to Chachma law. Remember, Chachma law is Chachma Gluya basically. Chachma law means Chachma Atzilus. Not law and sti'maah is lower than law. It's not Chachma law, Chachma Tata. It's saying Chachma law and even higher than that. So it's a higher Chachma wisdom compared to unconscious wisdom or concealed. Chachma sti'maah means concealed, hidden wisdom. Now the same thing is the containers compared to the energy. So he's adding another piece here. The same thing is, remember, he's talking about Keli Menor, the whole thing. The whole thing is an example of Keli Menor. He's using an example from Chachma, but really it's coming back to containers and energies. So he says now, he just adds to just connect it. What's connection? You could say, one second, I'm talking about energy and containers. Why bring me Chachma and Chachma sti'maah? That's above. So he says, because the root of Chachma, of Erech Chachma, is in hidden Chachma. So in other words, Kelei HaChachma is Chachma Gluya, is the revealed. The Erech Chachma is rooted in unconscious Chachma, mocha sti'maah, which is essentially K'tama Kamus. That's going to be the place. The state Kachol Machshava comes there. I guess the word Machshava is key there, because if it says Kachol B'Ritzeinei, you wouldn't be able to call it necessarily Seichel.
Right.
Maybe machshava is a key word here. The question is why. In other words, Hashem could have just said, "Listen, this is what I want," but He doesn't want to do things that are just completely outside of the league of seichel. It's just not in our seichel. There's a reason for that. It's part of the interface. So even when Hashem does something like a nes, I mentioned about Kriyas Yamsuf, you could just do a nes and just shatter, just suspend all laws of nature. He doesn't suspend all laws of nature. He stopped the sun and the sky. He could have done it completely. The Kriyas Yamsuf, He sent the wind. Everything has some measure of container. Even the Nisim Geluya Mamash, not just the Nisim Ulabashim B'Teh. Even open miracles, not just those that manifest in nature. So let's see where he's going here. Okay. There's a long parenthesis here. V'nira Ayin Beis. V'nira. Interesting, Nira is different than Yesh Leimer. Yesh Leimer says one can say. Nira is more like, it appears to me. It doesn't say Nira doesn't mean Nira Li, but Nira, it appears. Interesting to distinguish when is a Yesh Leimer and when is a Nira. Nira seems a little more personal. Nira, I think, is like a bigger chiddush probably.
What would y'all say about that?
Or maybe the other way around. I'm not sure. V'nira Ayin Beis. It's almost I think it's almost like a less formal explanation than a Yesh Leimer. It's like almost like the Rebbe Shab explaining something that says Chassidus, but he's a Rebbe and he's saying it in a minor. V'nira, and it appears V'nira. How do you say V'nira? And it appears. The Inyan of this is like this. The energy of Chachma, being that also in its root, it's Chachma, it's wisdom. He's explaining why it's not higher than Chachma. Being that even Chachma, the Chachma that is Eira Chachma, being that it is rooted Chachma, still wisdom. That's why when it comes down into the keli, it fits. If it was not Chachma, it wouldn't fit. It wouldn't fit into the container. So again, you'd have no connection between the higher and the lower. There'd be a disconnect. It's basically. So that's why it stops us and manifests itself and unites with klei chachmadiyos ke'erech mahusakli, to be commensurate, proportionate to the essence of the container, to the point that it in a way doesn't lose, but it's actually now closer to the container than it is to its source. So there's the other twist. It's like when it goes into the klei gvura or klei this, it's there, more there than it is in its source, but it doesn't lose its sense of air.
It's like a neshama.
Yeah. And this is when the Inyan, when we say Chachmi law, conscious wisdom is not proportionate to unconscious wisdom. Like we see in Seichel Anushi in human intelligence, which was referring to the intelligence in the mind, not intelligence in the nefesh, in the source. Human intelligence is not proportionate to the understanding, to intelligence and comprehension in the soul on its own. That is like being above seichel compared to the seichel shebemeich, like he explained before, because we only understand Mitzias, and there's the Mahus Ruchnis. And the reason for this is the reason for this is because also the seichel in the soul, in the source, in other words, is still at least seichel. It's still, at the end of the day, it's seichel. So though on one hand it's beyond, but since it's still by its essence is seichel,
higher intelligence.
Yeah, one second. Okay. So Chachmei law is ain't a berech to Chachmei sti'maah. But Chachmei sti'maah at the end of the day is Chachmei. So once it comes into this, once it's a reflection of it, it extends, is drawn, it transmits into the mind. It becomes seichel, like the essence of the way a physical mind understands things. To to grasp only the essence of a physical thing. And the spiritual thing, it grasps also the Metzias. He's adding another thing now. Because like this, if it's Chachma, sti'maah, and it really does get the mahus, so why when it enters into our mind can we get the mahus? So you have to say, because it now is so-called captured. It became tailored and fits into the container and the container's terms, not on its terms. But it retains Chachma still. So the only thing that it has similar to where it came from is that it's still wisdom. In other words, it's not airtight. There's still a channel, but it's gone far lower, and so it's closer to the container than it is to the source. And the in other words, because of its source is still seichel, that's the reason that its reflection, when it manifests in the container, it becomes like the muhus of the keli. It becomes similar to, and
It's still,
it assumes the properties. Yeah, it remains of the keli,
which is second.
right? And now it's not proportional anymore to the source and root. The parenthesis keeps going till where? Till the end?
No. Be'erech a little further down.
Well, commotion is barely ill, like we explained earlier, Basaga Shammai v'Hillel. Explained earlier in the understanding of Shammai and Hillel, Shenas Estem Asvar B'chinas Chesed Gvura Mamish. By then the Svar of the thought became literally lenient or stringent. Literally Chesed and Gvura. Shasibul is B'chinas HaChesed Gvura B'Helam Shashiez B'Svar Sadav. The reason for it is because the Chesed Gvura B'Helam concealed in the thought of the idea. So in other words, just like here, Chachma is still Chachma. That's why when it comes down, it actually is Chesed and Gvura, because it was Chesed and Gvura before in an amorphous state. And the same thing is with the conscious or the higher Chachma compared to the hidden, unconscious wisdom. And like the source and root of wisdom, even though it's also wisdom, it is in a form of formlessness compared to conscious wisdom. Like in the being silent, that's what arose, in my thought. This has no place in the logical structure of conscious wisdom. Even though in the concealed conscious wisdom there's a reason. And the reason for that is because the tam v'chachma, the reasoning and intelligence in unconscious wisdom is higher than tam l'gaba chachma the gluya. Compared to the conscious logical system, it's higher than reason, kanal, as we discussed earlier. So just like it is, this is like he says like both ways, that it is pshittis, and therefore higher than reason. The same thing is the energy of chachma, even though when it manifests in the container, it's now become formed by, it has assumed the properties of chachma. It is now together, it's in the category of the wisdom of the container. Nevertheless, fundamentally, it becomes bli ma the gabakeli. Nevertheless, compared to the container, is bli ma, it's formless. Because the comprehension of the energy fundamentally is because of its source. Because the comprehension of the air, which is meaning what comes from its source, which is because of its source and root, is completely is formless. Like it's being above seichel, being above seichel, understanding and comprehension, compared to the comprehension of the container. So what does happen? The container, nikna ba, it assumes an understanding like this, like what? Like the one in the container. But it still fundamentally retains its original personality, even though it's come down into this level of container. Even though the reason for this is because of the true seichel, that's why it assumes this. Here goes the other way around. Nevertheless, without the container, it would have been the same type of seichel and intelligence like it is in the source and root. And it's only because of the container that this intelligence is now is not proportionate to its source. So it has everything from all sides is going on here. It becomes much closer to the container, but it retains its essential personality. Without the container, it would remain there. So it is coming because it's seichel. So it's seichel, but the container forces it down in this situation. And that's why the air, the energy, fundamentally is in a form of formlessness compared to the container. Because the container is not commensurate to the energy. We'll move in the Ayin Beis. This is still the parentheses.
Yeah.
We'll move on and it's understood the Ayin Beis. It's understood that this distance, this disproportion between the container compared to the energy is far more than the disproportion of the energy that manifests in the container compared to its source. Because the energy that manifests, that which it becomes now in the same category of the comprehension of the container, that's only because it's manifest in the container, not on its own. And here in the parentheses he adds, and even that which is the fact that it's intelligence, that even its root, it's chokhmah, it's only a reflection of that chokhmah. What does this add? Okay, let's continue. But fundamentally, the comprehension of the energy is like the comprehension in its source. So therefore, it's not that distant. But the disproportion of container to energy, but the disproportion of container to energy is because fundamentally its comprehension and wisdom of the container is not in the same league, the same essence of the wisdom of the energy. So the wisdom of the energy, therefore, is not as disproportionate as container to energy. The parenthesis ends here, right? That's the nida, his explanation of this whole thing. So it'll be good to see, understand what this adds. Is the same as with all the energies in the 10 spheres. Chesed, the legav, like chesed, which is on the inside. The lebar and legav. Oh no, I'm sorry, the legav, the atikim. No. Like chesed, the inside of atikemen, the highest levels. That's compared to energy, compared to the chesed of the world of Zah. Nevertheless, there can still be an exchange of roles, a reversal of roles. The energy of Gvura in the container of chesed. Because in Atika Kadisha, which is the highest level, even though there's chesed and Gvura, nevertheless we say that there's no Gvura, there's no small, there's no left. In Atika Kol Yamin, everything is consumed in the right, in chesed.
So how could it be Gvura?
Right. So how could it be Gvura? L'chein era Gvura imi yeshu b'chins Gvura m'komot mitzat shoshi m'gvura d'atikim yochel is b'chtei chesed. It means it's in a state, because it's like in Shmaya Vavtalion, it's in a state of pshittus, formlessness. So there's Gvura there, but it's not like, it's like what he said with the making of film, Dal Parshas. That's why you can enter into a container of chesed. That's why, by what we said before, by Shammai Hill, that you can have Beishamai being lenient because of the intelligence and comprehension of the Rav, where shehu b'chinas pshitus l'gabeim, which is formless compared to them, and that's why there can be an exchange of ideas from Gevurah to Chesed, Chesed to Gevurah. And therefore, when we say that the energies are bli ma, without form, bli muhus, without substance, that means it's relative. Compared to the essence of the essence sphere, 10 spheres, which are the containers, they're formless. That's to the extent that they can reverse their roles. The containers, on the other hand, do not change and are not reversed. Like we discussed earlier in the example of Shaman Hill. The Sheresh HaKelim, the root of the containers, Nimshachim Adashimu, because the root of the containers come from the residue, the Rishimu that remained after the Tzimtzum, Shehu Sheresh Keach HaGvul, that's the root of the finite power. Avamechas Timor Datika, the unconscious wisdom of Atik, Nimshach Ma'akav, comes from the Kav, Shubchinis Ha'er, the energy, Shu'ara Ere Insed Baruch Hu, Lamayla Mayla Mohus HaKelim, Achemiklet Slam Bli Ma. That's rooted in the energy, which comes from the infinite energy that's higher than any containers, to the extent that you call it without substance. It is that essence of spheres mamish. Nevertheless, there's still energies of the 10 spheres literally. And that means also in the energy there's 10 spheres. And they're only, not higher, but in the kavachut, in the thread and ray of light. You mind opening that? I'm just saying, I'm just going to read the kitzur and finish here. I'll read the kitzur. To understand this above, be silent. That's how it arose in the will, in the thought. Tam kamus, and just give me another minute. Tam kamus. There is a concealed reason. And it's higher than, completely than Chachma, compared to the Chachma of Atzilus. Like the intelligence of the soul before it manifests in the body. Its comprehension is higher than comprehension in the body, which is tangible and physical and so on. Nevertheless, even that intelligence, the higher one, is still the root and source of conscious wisdom. Because also the source, it's still wisdom at the end of the day. And that's why when the energy manifests in a container, it becomes like the wisdom in the container. Like the source, even though it's wisdom, it's in the form of pshittus. He's adding here now, like the other side.
It's like a new thing. It's a running paragraph, a running sentence. I think it's like.
Same thing as the energy, and fundamentally is formless compared to the container. Because the disproportion of the energy is not like disproportion of the containers. That's why they reverse their roles. Therefore, also the energies are of 10 spheres, and they are formless compared to the containers. Okay, so that's chapter 14, pages 22 to 24.